depending on whether you're attending a Palestinian school or a Jewish school. There's a lot of other kind of ways that you can look at how budgets are manipulated that I won't go into for the sake of time. But of course, if you think about it, the discrimination that occurs at that very early stage of a person's life, in terms of teaching, facilities, etc., resources, is going to have knock-on effects as they grow up in terms of their access to further education, their ability to access jobs and the market. I also wanted to mention as well the way in which the Israeli Education Ministry explicitly tries to push a particular ideology within the framework of the schooling system. So just to give you a few examples of that. In 2005, the then Education Minister, who at that time was Limor Livnat, she advocated a program for middle school students. And the purpose of that program was, quote, to reinforce the strong connection that exists between the Jewish people and the land. And remembering, of course, that 20% of the population is Palestinian. The current education minister in Israel, in 2009, said it was going to be no longer possible for textbooks to use or refer to the Nakba, okay, which is the Arabic word for catastrophe, how the Palestinians describe what happened in 1948 when most of them were ethnically cleansed from what became Israel. Okay, so it's from 2009 onwards, the education minister said that's not going to be allowed to be discussed. And just last year, when he was speaking to an education conference, the education minister, a conference in Tel Aviv, he said that the ministry was never going to permit the instruction of the Palestinian narrative in Israeli schools. Another couple of examples of how that then works out. 2010, a principal of a high school was reprimanded by the education ministry because a textbook that was used in the school referred to the Nakba. Last year, it was December, another high school was scolded by the education ministry because it took students on a human rights march. This is from a Human Rights Watch report in 2001, which was looking at the education system in Israel. Quote, discrimination against Palestinian Arab children colours every aspect of the two systems. Right? And if you know something about what happens in all of Palestine and Israel today, you'll know that discrimination and two systems is a kind of reoccurring pattern. East Jerusalem, again something brief on East Jerusalem, the same pattern exists in terms of disparity of funding, discrimination that affects resources and facilities. But of course in East Jerusalem you have an extra factor that affects the education arena as it affects other areas of life, which is the apartheid wall as well in Jerusalem, which divides families from families, neighbours, splits communities, and makes it very difficult to access the kinds of basic infrastructure of normal life that Palestinians were used to accessing in East Jerusalem. This was from last year. A top UN humanitarian official called Valerie Amos visited, and she said this. She was talking about the wall. She said the wall, quote, divides communities and inhibits the provision of services. She went on to say, I visited a one-room school with no windows and very few facilities, which can't be improved because the planning rules don't allow it. This is unacceptable. Although, of course, as we've seen this week, what is unacceptable for some is actually teaching people about the apartheid war. To look again a bit about broadening out to the West Bank and Gaza, of course, since 1967, when Israel's military rule over that territory began, school students, university students have been, like all of the Palestinians, subject to the same regime of arbitrary arrest, control of movement, beatings, harassment. School facilities have been bombed, vandalized, attacked by the Israeli military. So I mean, all of that's been going on since '67. I remember reading a book by someone, a key figure in the history of Birzeit University, and it was very interesting reading about how long before the first Intifada, there was a systematic pattern of targeting political activity by Palestinian students on that campus, students who were explicitly kind of pushing forward popular resistance strategies, raising the Palestinian flag, etc. Right? The universities were kind of a key focus for Israeli repression. And another angle I wanted to mention too is the way in which Israel has separated, effectively separated Gaza Strip and the West Bank in terms of the Palestinian ability to go in between the two. And that has also had implications in terms of education, because it means that Palestinians from Gaza who want to study in universities in the West Bank are being prevented from doing so. It was in 2009 that a Palestinian 21-year-old woman, student called Belanti Azam, was at a checkpoint in the West Bank and was taken by Israeli soldiers, blindfolded, and forced to taken physically to the Gaza Strip. And the reason, like her crime, from the Israeli regime's point of view, was that her ID was Gaza Strip registered, and there is now a systematic policy of making sure that there is not the ability for Palestinians with Gaza Strip ID to be residing and working and studying in the West Bank. And Bethlehem University, like all the other universities, struggle to get, or find it impossible to get students from the Gaza Strip to come to the West Bank. Remembering that even under the framework of the Oslo Accords, right, even under that rubric, the West Bank and Gaza Strip are meant to be considered one territorial unit. The bigger picture, of course, in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Okay? It's a routine existence of the demolition of homes for not having the right permit while Jewish settlements increase and expand alongside them. It means a road network that discriminates against the Palestinian population. It means olive trees being uprooted. It means waking up one morning to find that soldiers have put a piece of paper on your land saying that it's going to be confiscated for security reasons. Right? This is the day-to-day reality in which all these other things take place. Okay? And I mean, if you're a vaguely credible human rights kind of organization or human rights concerned individual, these facts are just obvious. I mean, now it's standard or routine for mainstream human rights organizations to be describing the situation in the occupied territories in the strongest sort of terms. Just to give you a couple of examples, this is a quotation from Amnesty International. Quote, "The establishment of settlements violates international humanitarian law and constitutes a serious violation of the prohibition on discrimination. The presence of settlements has led to a mass violation of human rights of the local Palestinian population." Okay, those are things that I'm sure many of you have heard before. Remember, this is very important. This is one of the kind of most respected human rights organizations in the world, talking about Israel in terms of systematic discrimination, a state that likes to present itself as quote unquote the only democracy in the Middle East. Human Rights Watch, look at the language Human Rights Watch use here. Palestinians face systematic discrimination merely because of their race, ethnicity and national origin, depriving them of electricity, water, schools and access to roads, while nearby Jewish settlers enjoy all of these state-provided benefits, not just separate, not just unequal, but sometimes even pushed off their lands and out of their homes. Right? This is the language that's being used by the mainstream human rights organizations nowadays to talk about what's happening in the occupied territories, of which education is only one part. And the reason why I wanted to mention examples from the pre-67 borders, East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza, is because what you have nowadays is a de facto one state. You have Israel controlling the whole territorial unit. It's under one regime, and that regime explicitly discriminates, explicitly denies or grants rights to groups of people who live in that regime on an ethno-religious basis. Right, this is what Israel is having to defend now. This is what it's sending these envoys out to defend. And I'm going to finish my contribution just by, if you're not already, by asking you, by calling everybody here to do whatever they can, whether it's big or small, in this struggle for justice. And don't be dissuaded by the abuse of language like coexistence and dialogue, right? Don't be put off by people who use important words and important concepts like coexistence and dialogue in order to stifle what is a growing international justice movement. Don't be frightened by people who sling around the smear of anti-Semitism as a way of trying to frighten people off taking real significant action. Of course, it's normal that there's going to be tension on a campus or anywhere when an injustice is exposed and talked about. Why is there going to be a tension? Because there's going to be a tension between those trying to defend and apologize for apartheid and those trying to dismantle it. I'm honoured to say that I'm part of that latter group, with many other people who are working to dismantle Israeli apartheid. Okay, around the world, in the UK, that's what's happening, and standing alongside the Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation. and may we be the ones who see it through to completion. Thanks very much.